Selling at the trade deadline is a funny thing. Particularly funny in 2020 because a bunch of the teams that sold at the deadline are in the makeshift playoffs right now. Now you can oversell, burn the whole team to ash and spend forever trying to rebuild. Or, if you manage your assets just right, a team will approach you hoping to win the Stanley Cup themselves, and a few years later, it's you trying to win the cup, no matter how small the deal. This trade is a perfect example of that. So we're going to look at the Carolina Hurricanes sending Ron Francis to the Toronto Maple Leafs in 2004. Now, here's what we're not going to accept. Any Ron Francis slander at all. He was rarely ever the best player on his own team, but that's the sort of thing that happens when you play with Mario Lemieux and Jaromir Jagr. Ron Francis's 1,731 NHL games played is the 4th highest number of all time. His 1,791 points is 5th. His 549 career NHL goals is 29th all time, and his 1,294 career assists is 2nd all time. Only 2 players in NHL history have ever topped 1,200 assists, and it's him and some other guy named Wayne Gretzky, who had over 700 more assists. He was silly. Basically, Ron Francis was very, 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 very good and underrated. But time catches up to everybody, and at some point, your career's coming to an end. And if your team's not in the playoffs, you might as well make a go of it and get traded somewhere. March 9th, 2004, that somewhere ended up becoming Toronto for Ron Francis. And the trade was very simple. Ron Francis to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and Carolina acquires a 4th round pick in 2005. Now, if you're the Leafs, you don't care about that 4th rounder at all. You're trying to win a cup here. Conference final in 2002, 2nd round in 2003. Come on, we gotta get over the top. And they certainly pulled out all the stops. On top of acquiring Ron Francis, in the weeks leading up to that, the Leafs got Brian Leetch as well. But Ron Francis is in his 40s now. Like, how is he really gonna help the Leafs in their playoff grind? Early returns were kinda meh. No goals in his first 7 games as a Leaf, although he did have 3 assists. But in his final 5 games leading into the 2004 Stanley Cup playoffs, 3 goals, 4 assists for 7 points in 5 games. This guy isn't over the hill, he's standing on top of it, staring down at the commoners. Then the playoffs come, and no goals, 4 assists in 12 games as the Leafs are eliminated by the Philadelphia Flyers in the 2nd round. But how is that Ron Francis's fault? It's not. The 10 points in 12 regular season games leading into the playoffs were nice, but you don't pay a 4th round pick for someone and expect them to be an integral part of your lineup at over 40. Depth piece, sure. Supporting cast, sure. Veteran presence, absolutely. But you don't expect them to shoot the lights out. And then that's it. There's a lockout in 04-05. Ron Francis never plays an NHL game ever again. Brian Leetch never played for the Leafs again either, even though he had a year left on his contract, but it was voided because of the 04-05 lockout. People don't forget. And while Ron Francis may not have played in the NHL ever again, what of that 4th round pick? Leaf fans going, oh, this is gonna be painful, isn't it? You know, it's really not. They didn't give up a Hall of Famer here. It's just the Hurricanes being really clever. Let me explain. The Hurricanes never actually used this pick. They took this 4th rounder in 2005, 101st overall, and traded it to the Columbus Blue Jackets for defenseman Derek Walser and a 4th round pick in 2006. These deals are always fascinating to me because it's like high stakes gambling. Derek Walser did have some NHL games under his belt, but none with the Carolina Hurricanes. So basically, it was just a swap of the 4th round picks. Well, over a year ahead of time, Carolina's pick from Columbus, you have no idea where that pick is gonna land. Columbus could finish last, and then that 4th ends up being basically a late 3rd. Or they could win the Stanley Cup, and all of a sudden that 4th is basically an early 5th. Luckily though, for the Carolina Hurricanes, they gave up the 101st overall pick in 2005. This 4th turned into the 99th pick in 2006, so they got to move up 2 spots just by being patient and waiting a year. But they didn't use that pick either. And I'm not going to tell you who that pick ended up getting used on just yet. First, we have 2 more trades coming out of this trade. First, Derek Walser is traded back to the Columbus Blue Jackets, this time for Mark Flood. He never ended up playing in the NHL for the Carolina Hurricanes organization, but this 2006 4th rounder is packaged with Danny Richmond, a former 2nd round pick in the NHL, and sent to the Chicago Blackhawks for defenseman Anton BABCHUK and a 4th round pick in 2007. Man, they get a 2005 pick from Toronto, they trade it for a 2006 one, and now a 2007. They keep kicking this can down the road. Well, that particular trade with the Chicago Blackhawks is tied to a playoff rental that helped the Carolina Hurricanes end up winning the Stanley Cup and help them acquire a player that they still have today. After 163 games with the Carolina Hurricanes, Anton BABCHUK was packaged with Tom Kostopoulos and sent to the Calgary Flames for Ian White and Brett Sutter. Ian White's an interesting name, and Leaf fans might remember him, Flames fans might remember him, everyone might remember him. He pinged around the league. But I remember him as a guy in the Leafs organization who could not get into the lineup, and one night the Leafs were short a forward. And even though Ian White was a defenseman, they said, "Do you want to play?" And he goes, "Sure." And he ended up scoring. He did end up getting a defense job in Toronto. He became a pretty valuable player, was involved in the Dion Phaneuf trade to Calgary, which then led to this trade with Carolina. And even though he only spent 39 games as a member of the Carolina Hurricanes, Ian White had turned himself into a very valuable piece, so he was able to be traded for a 2nd round pick. The trade was Ian White to the San Jose Sharks in exchange for a 2nd round pick in 2012. And now finally, with that 2nd round pick in 2012, the Carolina Hurricanes actually use it. With the 47th overall pick in the 2012 NHL draft, the Carolina Hurricanes select forward Brock McGinn. He spent a few years in the AHL before making it to the NHL, and even though he's not a shoot the lights out, rack up the point superstar in this league, he's played over 300 games for the Carolina Hurricanes organization. That's a successful draft pick. And now for the Carolina Hurricanes to go for a playoff rental of their own. It's the 2005-2006 NHL season, and it's kind of a wild one. Everyone's all pent up because they just spent a full season in a lockout in 04-05. The rules have changed. There's a penalty every 5 minutes, and the league is packed with a backlog of young superstars, including Dion Phaneuf, Alex Ovechkin, I don't know if you've heard of him, and Sidney Crosby. But underrated amongst those names, Eric Staal. Staal was the 2nd overall pick in 2003, and he had a pretty successful rookie season in 03-04, putting up 31 points in 81 games. Yeah, that's not bad. He plays in the American Hockey League during the 04-05 lockout, and he is exactly a point-a-game player, 77 points in 77 games. Hey, he could be pretty good. 05-06 comes, and kablooey. Eric Staal's sophomore season saw him play the full 82 games, score 45 goals, 55 assists for 100 points on the button. 3 other players on the team topped 70 points. Justin Williams, a still relatively young Justin Williams, had 76. Corey Stillman had 76, and Rod Brind'Amour had 70 on the button. Not to mention Rod Brind'Amour won the Selke that season. But despite all that, the Hurricanes still felt like they needed some star power. Maybe a little bit more veteran presence. And what are you willing to give away when you're looking for those things? A 4th round pick. So, the Carolina Hurricanes took the 2007 4th round pick that they acquired now and traded that pick along with Mike Zigomanis, Jesse Boulerice, Magnus Conberg, a 2006 1st round pick, and another 4th rounder, this one in 2006, to the St. Louis Blues for Erikki Jaramäki and Doug Weight. Now, Jaramäki didn't end up playing a game in the NHL, so I guess the Hurricanes lost that trade, right? No. Like Ron Francis did with the Toronto Maple Leafs, Doug Weight played the same amount of regular season games as playoff games for the team he was traded to at the deadline. Fortunately for the Carolina Hurricanes, it was more than 12. In 23 regular season games with the Hurricanes, Doug Weight put up just 4 goals, but also 9 assists for 13 points. Solid. I don't know if it's traded 6 pieces including a 1st rounder to get you solid, but it's solid. In the playoffs, he was even better. He had just 3 goals in 23 Stanley Cup playoff games in 2006, but 13 assists, just slinging the puck all around the ice for 16 points in 23 games, en route to the 2006 Stanley Cup. Now, you gotta feel pretty good about that trade, right? Like, Doug Weight could have got 0 points. As long as you win the Stanley Cup, mission accomplished. But because of the young pieces you have on the Carolina Hurricanes, you're like, wait a sec, we're set up for the future too. Heck, I didn't even mention that their rookie goaltender Cam Ward won the Conn Smythe Trophy as playoff MVP. But on top of all that, with their playoff success, Carolina's cost for Doug Weight dropped. Their 1st rounder turned into the 30th overall pick, the last pick of the 1st round, because they were the champions. So this is the part where Hurricanes fans go, oh boy, what did we give up? Man, check this out. That 2007 4th rounder finally got used on Cade Fairchild. He only played 5 NHL games. The 2006 1st rounder was used on Matthew Corrente, who went to the New Jersey Devils and played under 40 NHL games. And the 4th rounder in 2006 used to select goaltender Reto Berra. And you might be like, wait a minute, Reto Berra, I remember that name. He played a lot in the NHL. Yeah, he did, but it wasn't until he was traded to Calgary almost a decade later because he spent all that time in Europe. So on top of winning the 2006 Stanley Cup, the Carolina Hurricanes, in the deal that they made to get Doug Weight, didn't even give up a draft pick that they'll miss, except, wait a minute, there was a pick I forgot about. That 2006 4th rounder that the Hurricanes got from Columbus. And then it says that the 2006 draft, Chicago decided to trade that pick, to the Leafs. And with the 99th overall pick, Hurricanes fans, you're not going to believe this, the Toronto Maple Leafs select James Reimer. Obviously, James Reimer had a lengthy and decent career with the Toronto Maple Leafs, got traded to the San Jose Sharks at the 2016 deadline, almost won the Stanley Cup as their backup, and then signed with the Florida Panthers as a free agent. Struggled there a little bit, so he ends up getting traded for Scott Darling to the Carolina Hurricanes. And it comes completely full circle. The Leafs get Ron Francis from the Carolina Hurricanes and give up a 4th rounder to do so. The Hurricanes take that 4th rounder and use it to get a different 4th rounder. And then they take that 4th rounder and trade it for another 4th rounder. Are you following? That 4th rounder has an excellent NHL career and finds his way to the Carolina Hurricanes anyway. James Reimer is 14-6-2 with the Hurricanes this season with a .914 save percentage and 3 shutouts. The guy is such a fan favorite that he's their Bill Masterton nominee this season. This is where I make the very easy joke about the Carolina Hurricanes getting goalies from the Leafs organization. Actually, you could throw the Red Deer Rebels in there as well because James Reimer and Cam Ward came from that team. And still, after all this time, over a decade and a half later, the Carolina Hurricanes get to have their cake and eat it too. So, is it a stretch to say that the Carolina Hurricanes won the 2006 Stanley Cup and have Brock McGinn and James Reimer because they got a 4th rounder from the Leafs in 2004? Yes, that's an enormous stretch. But you gotta admit, the Hurricanes did very well with this deal. It's almost like that old eBay thing where the guy trades a paperclip all the way up to a house, and the house is a Stanley Cup. But the greatest thing about that house is your organization gets to live in it forever. So, what'd you think of that trade tree? It was sort of like 1.5. It's kind of like one of those appetizers that when it arrives it's so big you're like, maybe I don't need a main, but I don't know if you know this. There's a comment box down below, so let us know. So that is it for this one. Thank you very much for watching. Click like if you like this video. Click subscribe if you really liked it. Tell all your friends that it's always about James Reimer.